Hi, everybody. This is your presentation for week 6. We are going to be asynchronous this week, so there will not be a live Zoom on Thursday. So you will watch this. There are a few things that you'll have to do on Blackboard, and I will also upload the notes. So let's jump in. So this is going to be Module 5, and we are working in Chapter 8. So Chapter 8 is very long, so you were only to read a portion of Chapter 8, which were pages 137 through 149. And in a minute, I'm going to switch to our presentation. I'm showing that on the screen here. While you do the presentation, there are some videos that are embedded into the presentation, and I have numbered them here on Blackboard for you to watch. Okay, so in the presentation, in the notes, when you get to video 1, you will pause this video, and then you'll go onto Blackboard and watch video 1. Okay, and then you'll go back to the presentation. When you get to video 2, you will pause this video, go to Blackboard and watch video 2. There are a total of 5 videos. Before you watch video 4, grab a blank piece of paper and a pen or a pencil to do the activity. Okay? Also on Blackboard, you will find the reading assignment for next week. You're going to read pages 149 through 156. And then next Tuesday, you have 3 things due. Your quiz for the week is due. You're going to have a discussion board post that will be due. And then also your virtual observation reports are going to be due. Okay, so with that said, I'm going to jump over to our presentation and we will get started with Module 5. Now, this module is pretty long, but I'm going to try to go through it and be as concise as possible. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, or we can use the first portion of our next class, Zoom, which will be the 16th, if I'm correct, and we can answer some questions if you have questions from this module. Okay, so today we are going to learn about the 8 components of the SIOP model. What was the goal of the SIOP model? And then we're going to look at some resources. And then we're also going to look at the WIDA lesson plan template. And that is the lesson plan template that we will be using for your final project, which is the lesson plan assignment. Okay, so why was the SIOP model created? We've discussed this almost every module, every week, that English language learners are not performing in the classrooms equally as their peers, as native speakers. And so there are many fields of study that try to implement new methods of teaching to try to make it an equal playing field for English language learners. Okay, because this achievement gap exists, and researchers, scientists, teachers want to figure out ways that we can help to close this achievement gap so that English language learners and native speakers are performing at an equal level. Okay, so the SIOP model was created to help teachers in mainstream classrooms effectively teach English language learners. Okay, so this lesson plan was made with mainstream teachers in mind, maybe teachers that are not ESL teachers, but teachers that do have English language learners in their classroom, and they may not have a lot of training in this area. They may not go to all the conferences, have tons of professional development in this area. However, if they are to add all of these components into their lessons, they will be able to effectively teach English language learners not just the content, but language as well at the same time. So, SIOP stands for Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol. I'm not even going to try to pronounce these names, but it was developed by these three ladies, and they have done tons of research in the area of educating English language learners. If you search any academic articles, you will surely come up with their names. They have textbooks that they've written. They've done a lot of work in this area. So the SIOP model is focused on giving English language learners access to content area. So reading skills, math, science, social studies, writing skills, at the same time meeting their language skills. So think of it like this funnel. And at the same time, they're learning language and they're also meeting their academic needs. So they're not in a place where we're just going to first teach them language and then worry about their academic needs. No, we're going to do it simultaneously at the same time. Okay, so these eight these eight components are lesson preparation, building background knowledge, having comprehensible input, effective strategies, interaction, practice and application, lesson delivery, and review and assessment. So we're going to go through each of these components. Okay, and then we'll go over the WIDA lesson plan, and you'll see that these 8 components are embedded in the WIDA lesson plan. So the first component is lesson preparation. And so I kind of like to think of this as all the things that you need to think about that you're going to put into your lesson. Before you sit down to write your lesson, you need to have some of these things, or you need to be thinking about some of these things. So, first one, your lesson needs to have a clearly defined content and language objective. So, the content objectives is what is the student going to be doing during that lesson. And in the state of Missouri, we use the Missouri Learning Standards that can be found on DESE's website. They are for pre-K through 12th grade, and they are in every subject area. So kindergarten has learning standards, first grade has learning standards, and then also there's learning standards for art class, PE class, music class. So the state lies out what kids need to know. So before you get ready to write a lesson, you want to know what it is that you're teaching them. Then the language objective is the language that the students need to be able to accomplish the content objective. And I'll give you an example of that as we go over the lesson plan. So objectives should be written in a student-friendly language because when you teach a lesson, you're going to tell the students what it is that they're going to learn today. And I do that with you guys before we start a presentation. I tell you what it is that we are going to go over. What are you expected to learn today? The objectives should be appropriate for students' age and their academic background. So if students are in third grade, then they should be working to learn third grade standards. If students are in sixth grade, they should be working to learn sixth grade standards. Also, their L2 proficiency should be taken into consideration when you are thinking about the language objective, right? So if a student is in, let's say, third grade, but they're still in the silent period, the language objective might be for them to respond with a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So, not something where they have to produce language because they're in the silent period. And we know that when students are in the silent period, they don't produce language, they don't produce output. So, you need to keep in mind their proficiency level when planning a lesson. Also, think about all of those supplementary materials that you want to use during your lesson to help with comprehension. So, do you want to use any anchor charts, any graphs, visuals, pictures? If you're going to draw something, if you're going to have any realia, so real objects. If you're doing math, what manipulatives are you going to use? What graphic organizers you're going to use? You want to think about intentionally all these things before you sit down to actually write a lesson. And then you want to think about making the activity something that is engaging for students, something that they're going to want to participate in. If it's boring, then a lot of students probably will zone you out. So you want to make sure that these activities are authentic and engaging to students, and so that they can practice their language domains, practice listening, speaking, reading, and writing, all while learning content area standards. Okay, so component two is building background knowledge. So teachers have to make a bridge for students from something that they already know or something that they're familiar with to their new learning. And a lot of times, teachers assume that students have prior knowledge or they may already know something about certain content, and that's just not true. They have never experienced it before. For instance, if you were going to teach about um, I don't know, anything. If you're going to teach about baseball, I think that is an example in one of the slides, one of the next slides. Some students may have never heard of baseball, but maybe they've seen a baseball field and they've seen the different bases. Okay, so you can't just assume that students are familiar. You want to create this bridge for them, and you're going to bridge it to maybe their personal experiences, cultural experiences, or previous academic experiences. And when teachers do that, it helps students to have a connection to new learning that they're going to have. Don't assume that students understand the content of the lesson. And then you also want to not, I don't want to say focus on vocabulary, but without vocabulary, students don't have ways to express themselves, ways to show their learning. Okay, so any academic vocabulary needs to be taught explicitly. You need to they need to know the word, and then they need to know what the word means. And then you are going to use those different supplemental materials to help them understand the word. For instance, one of the supplemental materials could be a chart or pictures or actually real objects. You are going to help them understand the academic vocabulary. Okay. When students have limited vocabulary, when they don't have the words to name things, to express themselves, that hinders their ability to comprehend what they're reading, to understand what you're saying, to even be able to follow your directions. Think about if you ask them to highlight something. If they don't know what highlight means, they're not going to be able to do it. So these are all the things you need to think about before you get started with the lesson. You are going to be very frustrated if you are using vocabulary that the students don't know and the students are not doing any work. When you ask them to go and complete something, they're just staring at you. Okay? And then don't just say the words, you need to show them. You need to make these words come to life for them. Draw it, give them an example, show them pictures, bring in real objects. Students need vocabulary support. Okay, so this is the first video, and a teacher is talking about building background knowledge for our students. And then here is a little clip art of the knowledge bridge. So students know, and they have a lot of schema from their previous experiences. However, we need to create this knowledge bridge for them. We need to bridge their new learning to things that they already know. And this is just an example of the baseball basis that I was talking about earlier, and students learning transition words. So whenever students learn how to writing, they use words like first, next, last. Okay, so you could use a baseball diamond, and maybe they're familiar with that, to help them bridge from what they already know to their new learning. So when somebody does baseball, they go to first base, then they go to the next base, and then last they go to home base. Okay, so you're using something familiar to help them learn something new. This is the second video. So you can pause and watch the second video. Okay, this is the third video. This is video 3. So you can pause and watch video 3. Okay, so another way to activate their background knowledge, or you might hear the term prior knowledge, they might already know some things about what you're teaching. And so you could always use a KWL chart to find out what the students already know, and then what are they curious about? What is it that they want to learn? What questions do they have? And then as a follow-up activity, you will ask them actually what they learned. So I use these charts a lot when I'm going to start any science unit or any social studies unit. If we're learning about specific themes or specific topics. For instance, if we are going to be learning about maps and globes. So I would ask the students what they already know about a map and globe. And they might say things like, the water is blue on a map, or a globe is like a ball. Those are things they already know. And then we would talk about what they want to learn, what they wonder. So this is a way just to assess what it is that students already know. These are some more examples of graphic organizers that you can use to organize the students' thoughts, what they already know. This one is used for animals, and so they can talk about what the animal has, what the animal can do, what is the animal, what they eat, where they live. And then this chart is not as specific to just animals. You can choose use this chart to talk about a person, a place, what it can do, what does it have, and what it is. Okay, so this is video number 4. Before you do this video, make sure you have a piece of paper and make sure you have a pen or a pencil. So you are going to watch video number 4 now. Okay. Component number 3 is comprehensible input. And you just watched video number 4, which helped you to understand that students need to be able to understand what it is that you are saying. If they don't understand anything that you are saying, then the lesson did not have a purpose. They didn't learn anything. They didn't weren't able to master anything because they didn't understand. Their input, what they were receiving, was incomprehensible. So we need to make sure that students can understand what we're saying. And sometimes students will not know the language. There are students that will come in your classroom that don't have any English at all. So the video showed some techniques. And so it showed her modeling what she wanted done. She was using gestures with her hands and she was demonstrating. That's the same as modeling for you what it is that she wants done. So when we have students that don't have any English, we need to use these techniques to help them understand what we want them to do. She used slow speech. She paused while she was speaking. She was speaking clearly. And then she used repetition. She repeated things multiple times to help make what she was saying more comprehensible to students. Okay, so these are just some examples of making directions comprehensible for students. Think about students that may not speak any English. If you ask them to color something, or if you ask them to cut, or nobody really uses the word paste anymore, but if you ask them to glue. So these are some visual directions that you can create in your class. And when you want them to color something, you can point to the word color in the crayon. Or when you want them to cut, point to the scissors. Okay, so these are visual directions. I really like this one. When you tell the students to write, color, circle something, underline something. There are so many kindergartners that start school and they don't know what that means. And it doesn't matter if they're an English language learner or not. Kids have to learn what the word underline means, what the word highlight means, what it means to draw something. So these are just some visual directions you can use in your classroom. Component number 4 would be comprehension strategies. So students can use these comprehension strategies across different content areas. So students have to learn from explicit instruction how to do these things. So students have to learn how to problem solve. They have to learn how to predict what will happen next. What do they think the outcome will be? Students have to learn how to make inferences. Maybe all the information isn't presented, but they can put the information together that was presented to make meaning from it. Students have to learn how to organize their thoughts, organize their work. That's why we use graphic organizers. Students need to know how to summarize, how to categorize, how to group things, how to evaluate something, and then how to monitor. Am I getting it? Am I not getting it? Do I need to reread something? Do I need to write that again? Students have to learn these comprehension skills. And we teach these, like I said, across all content areas. Okay? So when students are initially learning these comprehension strategies, they will require a lot of support. Gradually, the goal is to decrease support and for students to be able to do these things independently. So I just provided a few anchor charts that a teacher might have in their classroom to help students to be able to do these comprehension strategies independently. Okay, so I like this one. What do mathematicians do when they get stuck on a math test? So the last thing you want students to do every time they get confused, I need help. Somebody help me. You want to teach them to be a problem solver. So you're going to teach them to use this chart. Okay, so first, did I check my notes? Did I look at any anchor charts around the classroom? Did I reread the task and make sure I really understand what it's asking me to do? Did I try to draw it out to figure out the answer? Okay, so we want our students to be independent at these comprehension strategies. These comprehension strategies help them understand things in reading, in writing, in math, in science, in social studies. So, like I said, these comprehension skills are a high investment, but we get a lot of miles out of teaching our students these problem solving skills. This is a rubric that students use when they are writing. So this helps them to be an independent writer and they're able to check, did my sentence start with a capital letter? Do I have punctuation at the end? Is there a finger space? So students learn how to use this chart and then instead of just writing and turning it in, they then learn how to self-monitor what they're doing. This chart is talking about making inferences. When we put the pieces together, not all the details are there, but we're able to put the pieces together and make sense of something. I like these thumbs up and thumbs down for students to be able to evaluate. Did I like something? Or did I do a good job? Did I do an okay job? Could I do a little bit better? Hey, students, I'm sorry. Also, to make information more comprehensible to students, you want to use visual cues. So you'll have pictures, you'll have realia, which is real objects. Okay, so if I am teaching, let's say about baseball, I may have a real baseball. I may have a real baseball glove. I may have a real baseball bat if I'm going to be teaching about that. You're going to use your body. So you're going to use gestures, graphic organizers, and of course, anchor charts. These are graphic organizers to help students organize their thoughts about story elements. So, character setting, problem and solution. And then this is about main idea and details. Okay, this is an example of labeling something. making a diagram. Okay. And then this just basically touches on what I said earlier, that we want to teach kids these words. So not just to do it, but then they need to know the words. So if a student puts pieces together, read between the lines, they need to know that they're inferring. If you ask them to predict something, they can predict when they're reading a book, they can predict in science. We're going to connect those two words. They're doing the same thing. They're making a good guess. What do they think the outcome will be? What do they think will happen? So we want to teach students to know these words. And so we have to teach their vocabulary explicitly. When you do this, you're predicting. And I like this anchor chart. I actually have a more kindergarten friendly one in my class, but it's called Power Words. And those are words that we can get a lot of mouths out of. You also want to use multicultural bilingual books so they can actually be culturally relevant to students. You want to give students time to actually work with other students. So in my classroom, we say that we are a classroom family. So you want to build and foster, create an environment where students are learning together. It's not a competition who's learning the most, but we are learning together. Okay. And then you want to be thinking about your ELL students and what scaffolds you need to provide, what accommodations you can provide to prepare them to take and use what they learn in class on an assessment. And we talked last week about the importance of state assessments. Okay, so that leads us to component number 5, which is interaction. And that goes back to creating a classroom environment of collaboration where students are learning together. So there has to be interaction between the teachers and students, and then interaction from student to student. Okay, so students have to learn how to share their thinking with each other. And that's hard when students can't even speak English. So they need to learn sentence frames like, I think that, or I noticed that. They need to learn those sentence frames to be able to share their thoughts with one another. They need lots of opportunities to use the language that they've learned. Okay, so if all they hear is me saying predict, 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 but I never give them a chance to say, I predict that, they're not getting a chance to use their language in an authentic way. Also, when we are interacting with students, when they are producing output, we want to provide them with wait time. So think about if somebody asks you a question you need to think about, and they just ask you and they're staring at you and expecting an answer. You almost get nervous and you maybe forget what you're going to say. You may say the wrong thing. So we have to provide wait time. That is time that we give the students to think about what it is that they want to share. And that should become a routine in your classroom, that when you ask a question, they may put their hands up, but you give them some time to think. And that equals the playing field. So you will have those students that will come up with the answer right away, but then you'll also have those students that need a little bit of time to think about what it is that they're going to share. Okay, it is the teacher's responsibility to make sure that all students are engaged, all students are active participants. And if they aren't engaged or not participating, figure out why and try to get to the bottom of what is going on. Most kids are eager to share. So if somebody doesn't want to share, maybe get to the bottom of why. Students interacting with each other, talking with each other, increases their understanding, their comprehension. That's why it's so crucial. That's why this is a component that needs to be in any effective language, any effective lesson plan, specifically for English language learners. Also, when students are interacting with the teacher, with peers, it is an informal way to assess if they are grasping the content, or if there is misconceptions that the teacher needs to address. Okay, the sixth component is practice and application. And we all know what they say, practice makes perfect. Students need an opportunity to practice what they just learned. And we're no different. When we have some new learning, we need a chance to practice it. Think about when we were learning how to drive. You didn't just read the book on how to become a good driver, or traffic rules, traffic laws. You actually practice. So students need many opportunities to practice. Okay. So these are just some charts. I used to do my lesson plan like this. I do it, so that's where the teacher models. We do it together. Then you do it on your own, maybe with a partner in a small group, and then you do it independently without any help, without any support. And that's the same thing as model, share, guide, and apply. Okay? So model means the teacher does it, the students watch. Share is the teacher does it, but the students help. Guide, the student does it, but the teacher helps. And apply, you do it, and the teacher watches or assesses the student. Okay, there is component 7, which is lesson delivery. So, when you deliver a lesson, you need to be monitoring and making sure that you're actually covering the content and language objectives. So, the content objective cannot be about learning about maps, and you never show them a map. You never teach them about maps. So, you need to make sure that your lesson is aligned to your content objectives. You need to monitor your lesson pace. So, if you have very low babies or beginning ELLs, you need to make sure you are using a pace that students are able to keep up with. Make sure that students are engaged, and make sure that it's not just all teacher talk. So there is some teacher talk because the teacher needs to present, to model, but then there is also time for students to practice and to apply what they've learned. Okay, component 8 is a review or assessment. So, students' progress needs to be monitored, it needs to be reviewed. You're going to ask yourself, did the students master the content and language objective? If they did not, did I teach it? If I did teach it, what went wrong? Okay. And when teachers have that reflection period of what went wrong, did the kids get master the objectives, the teacher is able to adjust their plans if they need to reteach something. Okay, and some ways to wrap up your lesson would be going back to that KWL chart and adding in new learning. And that's a way to see what the students actually learned. Have them tell you what did they learn during the lesson, and then teaching them these sentence frames. I have learned. I wonder why. I still want to know. I still have questions about. I still don't know. Or I discovered something new. Okay, so the teacher is also going to provide feedback to students. And then I always think that um, feedback with students helps you to track if they have any misconceptions. Is there anything that they misunderstood? And also, I think to add to feedback, teacher reflection. Being able to reflect on your lesson. Was it a good lesson? Is there something you would maybe change next year or the next time you teach the lesson? Okay, so that leads us to the lesson plan, the WIDA lesson plan. And so I'm going to talk about the different parts of the WIDA lesson plan, and then I'll show you some pictures because this is the template that you are going to use to do your lesson plan assignment. So when we look at the WIDA lesson plan, you're going to start with the lesson title, okay? And you want to be specific about the title so that you can know when looking at the title what the lesson was about. Okay, the author of the lesson plan is going to be you, unless you are adapting a lesson plan that someone else has written. So if I write a really great lesson plan, you see it online, and you want to use it, teachers share, and teachers are pretty good about sharing what they've done. but you want to give that teacher credit. So you don't want to make it seem like you wrote this lesson plan. You always want to give the person credit if somebody else created the lesson plan. Okay, so a part of the WIDA lesson plan is to pick out what standard you are going to be addressing with the content objective. Okay, so if you are going to be teaching language, then you would mark this social and instructional language. This is for language arts, so that would be like ELA, math, science, social studies, music, visual arts, technology and engineering, health, that's PE, and then the language of humanities. If you teach that course, that would probably be for like middle school or high school. So you're going to mark what subject area you're going to be working in. And you should really only mark one. So if your lesson is concise, if it's specific, you shouldn't be marking 2 or 3 subject areas. You should only mark one. Okay, so what is the topic of your lesson? So that's just kind of quickly summarizing what the students are going to be doing. And then the target grade level. What grade level is your lesson plan written for? Okay, then you are going to pick the language domains that students uh, that will be the target in the lesson. Okay, you never want to pick every language domain. If you are saying you're going to target every language domain, your lesson plan is not specific, it's not concise enough. So you will probably have at the most two. At the most two. But again, remember you want your lesson plan to be bite-sized. So you don't write one lesson plan for the entire week. This is one lesson, okay? And then you'll write down approximately how long this lesson could take. This says here that it could take several days. However, in the lesson plan that I want you to do for this class, I don't want it to be a several days lesson. I want it to be one sit down, one interaction, one lesson. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about content objectives. This is the state objective that you are going to be addressing in the lesson. So I said earlier in Missouri, we use the Missouri Learning Standards, and I will put these links on our Blackboard page. This is the link to go to the Missouri Learning Standards. And you will need to, excuse me, you will need to navigate the Missouri Learning Standards because for the lesson plan, you're going to pick a standard that you are going to teach the lesson for. And then I want you to read this document because the Missouri Learning Standards have to be coded in a specific way. Okay, so this is going to help you learn how to code the standard that you are going to be using. So this is an example of a first grade standard. And the standard is, this is the code for the standard. And the standard is to read, infer, analyze, and draw conclusions to describe character, setting, problem, solution, and events in logical sequences. Okay, so these are several I can statements that you would be able to pull from this one standard. In a lesson, you don't want to ever have this many I can statements. That means that your lesson plan is not concise. So you might just do this one, be able to identify the setting in a story, or be able to identify the characters in the story. These are different parts that you can pull out of this one standard. Okay, so this is video number 5. So you can pause and watch video number 5, and she's going to be talking about the language objectives. So the language objective can also be written in an I can with an I can sentence stem. And you are going to think about what language do students need to master, need to know to be able to do this lesson. Okay? So for the first grade standard, this is a different one. This is a math standard that students can organize, represent, and interpret data with up to 3 categories. So they can ask and answer questions about the total number of data points, how many in each category, and how many more or how many less in one category than in another. Okay, so students will use comparison language in their, this is the wrong standard. I'm sorry, I have to update this. Okay, so I'm going to get you some more information for language objectives. Okay, so on the lesson plan, there is also an area to mark language supports. So, what kind of support are you going to be bringing? Additional supplementary supports will you be using in your lesson to help with comprehension? So, there's three categories. You could use sensory support, graphic support, or interactive support, and you're going to check the ones that you're going to use. Now, you don't want to have 10 of these checked. You want to be very specific. Are you going to bring in some real life objects? Then you would check that. Are you going to use any types of graphs, any type of graphic organizers? Anything that can help the students comprehend or understand the lesson more. Okay. On the lesson plan template, there's also going to be a place for you to think about how are you going to assess these students. So how are you going to know that they mastered the content objective? How are you going to know that they mastered the language objective? You have to have a plan for how you are going to assess them. You may think about doing what they call a backwards design, which you could start with how you're going to assess them. So after you figure out what content objective you're going to use, then figure out how are you going to know if they met that objective. So choose a content objective and then figure out how are you going to know that they met that objective. Okay, so the next part of the lesson plan is the language description. And this is really the bulk or the meat of the lesson. And this is an outline, step-by-step description of how the lesson is going to go. And this needs to be very specific. Okay, so think about if there was a sub in your classroom, they had never met your kids, they didn't know you, they didn't know your style of teaching, could they pick up this lesson and teach this lesson effectively? So it needs to be very specific. So this is not going to be just like 4 bullet points. This needs to be very detailed, very specific. It needs to show how you're going to meet the needs of your English language learners. And then it needs to consider everything that you've learned in this class. How are you going to build their background knowledge? What vocabulary are you going to teach the students? What vocabulary do they need to know to be able to master the content objective? Okay, so you're not going to do this portion because this is a hypothetical lesson, so you're not going to be able to write what context you would be using this lesson with. You're not going to be able to do a reflection because you're not actually going to teach the lesson. But these two things are a part of the WIDA lesson plan template. Okay, so we are um, finished with our presentation for this week. I'm going to go back to the Blackboard page. Again, these are the videos that you are going to watch. If you have gotten to this point and you haven't watched them, please go back and watch them. I'm going to also include here some links for the Missouri Learning Standards and for another support document on how to code the Missouri Learning Standards. And then I'm going to try to find some things on writing content and language objectives. And we may do that next week in class also. Okay, if you have any questions, please email me. And don't forget that you have on the 13th your quiz due, discussion board post is due, and also the virtual observation is due. Have a good week. Thank you.